I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're reaching new heights with a terrific book. It is called Reflections on Mountaineering, a journey through life as experienced in the mountains. It's written by a wonderful author. His name is Alan V. Goldman. This is the fourth edition of this book. It's expanded and revised and shares over 30 years of mountaineering wisdom through 115 narrative-style poems. The author reflects upon and explores parallels between the moral challenges faced in everyday life and those encountered in the high mountains, offering a unique meditation on reality, fear, awe, and the human spirit. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight, and we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. The links are below this interview. Alan, welcome to Spotlight. Great to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, Mr. Crawford. I do appreciate the opportunity to express the ideas animating the book, what animated me to write the book, how it came about that I did so, and so forth.
Absolutely. What struck me was when I called you today is that your phone number begins with 212, which is
one of the unique aspects of this book is that I regard myself as a kind of portal, giving a glimpse into the world of hardcore mountaineering, which is actually a subculture. I've defined it that way. It's an in-group with its own language, its own values. People aren't entitled to criticize you for what you've done up in the mountains unless they belong to the in-group. Because when you're up in the mountains, you're free from the judgment of others.
Yeah.
Spectators don't understand what it is you're doing. So I do provide that look into that world, and we went back to the world I came from, which was Eastern Seaboard academia, being a bookworm, educated at a fancy prep school, Horace Mann, then the school for boys, now it's co-ed, Harvard College, Harvard Law School. And it dawned on me at about the age of 25, after graduating from law school and beginning to practice, that I saw what was coming. And I had what people call a moment of clarity. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life hunched over a desk, writing footnotes in other people's briefs and hopefully someday in my own briefs. That just didn't seem to be enough of an achievement in life, and it certainly didn't didn't provide an outlet for the energy that I had at the age of 25. I'm 66 now. Technically, the book is in its fifth edition, revised and expanded with an addendum. So there are 148 poems. The book is now done, completed, and I continued to work on it after the fourth edition. I began it before COVID in 2019, and I wrote it through 2020. And believe me, the writing of it was the easiest part. The marketing and promotion of it has been the most taxing activity.
Yeah.
I learned, in the course of becoming acquainted with this world of book promotion, tours and book fairs and press releases. It was just a flood tide of activities that I was not familiar with. Writing the book and the poems in particular came to me in part because I had retained my logs from my climbing expedition, outlining what happened and when in particular climbs. We reached a certain spot at this time of day. We reached the summit at that time of day. We got down and so forth. And I used that skeleton to hang a poem on and to add to it, to convey to the average educated reader, not just to other poets or other mountain climbers. It's not designed for in groups like that. It's designed to make accessible the otherwise recondite sport of mountaineering to the general public. And I made plain what it was that we were doing. And whenever I used the technical term art, I did my best to either define it in so many words inside the text of the poem, so it's redundant, or put it in a place where it could be derived, inferred from context and understood from context. It's not intended to be obscurantist, esoteric, inscrutable poetry, which many people think of as what poetry is these days, and rightly so. Much poetry is cryptic and hard to grasp. My poems, by contrast, are written in the so-called narrative style of poems. This is regardless of whether they rhyme or are in blank verse or are so-called prose poems in structured verse. They are all narrative in that they convey a lucid, coherent, cogent story line that the reader can follow with a moral point, a life lesson, something he can take away or she can take away from the poem that's more than what was in my logbook, which is just the bare bones of what happened and when. It's to open up what people have always regarded as the hidden world of mountaineers, and to lay bare the so-called hidden truths that mountaineers are supposed to be privy to, and to shed light on the endeavor itself and its allures and its rewards in different contexts. The first allure of climbing, of course, is the very uncertainty of the outcome. It wouldn't be an adventure sport if it didn't have that uncertainty. And you are exposing yourself to uncertainty. This is what turns many people off to climbing. They can't imagine exposing themselves to any kind of risk in what is supposed to be an enjoyable sport. Climbing is a sport, the sport of getting from point A to point B in as safe a manner as possible. That's why some of my poems deride the so-called free solo movement that many people may have seen on the internet, where people climb without ropes, usually 18 or 19-year-olds. And they get away with this once or twice. If they don't sneeze or have a hiccup or whatever, there's no future in it. Yeah. It reminds me of the flying Walandas doing high trapeze acts in circuses without a net. It's not the sport of climbing. Climbers are not foolhardy people. They're very serious, dedicated, committed people with a sense of history of who's gone behind them and what it is they're contributing to the lore, the L-O-R-E, the stories about the mountain, by the very fact of their climbing it. they impart meaning to what otherwise had been, well, just a pile of undifferentiated rock, snow, and ice. Nothing. That is the essence of existentialist activity. As my very first poem, Being and Nothingness, which takes its title from Jean-Paul Sartre's book entitled Being and Nothingness in 1943, the seminal work in the field of existentialism, and tries to convey how by the very act of climbing the mountain, you imbue it, you infuse into it. There's so many verbs you could use here. Meaning, human meaning, the very least of which is you are adding to that mountain's lore. You are naming that peak, differentiating it from the rest of the rock, snow, and ice around it. And, you know, when people give something a name, it becomes part of the dialogue that one has about the object. It's subsumed into human interaction. Indeed, it becomes a kind of dialogue partner itself. Mountaineers are known to talk to the mountain. My very first poem, however, has a talking mountain, a mountain that talks to the climber and expresses what actually is in the climber's mind. Briefly, a few lines from Being and Nothingness on page 2 and 3 of the book says that, you know, what was that? I think it was Paul Waiting ID beat. Barren yet brazen, bold and beautiful for you to behold. My summit glistens. It's the beep again. My summit glistens with morning dew, etched into hoarfrost, cloaking my native peaks still more with passing like a mirage. My summit shimmers with an unearthly refraction, trembling from your evanescent embrace, reflecting your stamp of individuality to create the existential act of impressing meaning out of nothingness. And later on in the poem, I have the mountain chiding the climber, saying, "See here," the mountain might say, "I was but the quintessence of nothingness until you forced your will upon my blank form, and by your striving imparted meaningfulness to my abidingly neutral presence." So that's a backwards way of backing into the concept of existentialist creation of something out of nothing, merely by human interaction with it. But before we explore all the ramifications of existentialism, there's another phenomenon that's a predicate to existentialism. It's something called flow, F-L-O-W. Most sports fans and players recognize it as so-called being in the zone or living in the moment. Madonna had a famous song, "Getting into the Groove." It signifies a certain state of mind in which you have clearly defined goals with a measurable form, a form of measuring the progress that you make. You have immediate feedback. That's the key. The mountain will tell you whether you've done something wrong or right away. Yeah. And the rebuke from the mountain is quite sharp. You know, the rock crumble under your feet, and you'll know that you've made a wrong move immediately. And finally, self-confidence. That sociologists have analyzed this topic in great detail. You can Google the issue of flow and read hundreds of pages. This occurs when one's capabilities, one's perceived capabilities, are roughly equal to one's responsibilities. Then and only then can you enter into a state of flow. By contrast, if you are at either extreme of that, where your capabilities are greatly in excess of your responsibilities, you experience what the French sociologists call ennui, boredom. You feel underused, you feel demeaned by the task it's beneath you. The contrast to that is where your capabilities are greatly less than your responsibilities, in which case you experience fear. And the sociologists say this leads to so-called alienation from the object of your labor, a Marxist concept, or Marx took it and ran with it, let's put it that way, where the worker feels overwhelmed by the process creating the product. So he withdraws his identification from it. So he's alienated from it. Now, once you're in a flow state, there are many definitions for what that is. I've distilled one of my own. If you bear with me a moment, one definition of so-called flow is the sensation of intense, competent mastery over one's environment by the accretion of a series of small, self-reinforcing successes. It doesn't come about all at once. It's bit by bit. During the course of executing a self-directed goal of high difficulty or danger, requiring total immersion and absorption, and complete concentration and focus on the subject. This is to be distinguished from so-called hyper-focus, where people become video addicts, and they spend all their time playing video games or some other non-fruitful activity. So wasteful, repetitive activity, not creative. Flow entails achievement of a goal. It's the purpose of reaching that goal. It occurs, I can say colloquially, when people say everything falls into place, when everything comes together. And the passage of time is altered. One's subjective perception of the passage of time is said to slow down relative to outside observers. We all know the expression, time flies while you're having fun, right? Yeah. Well, it's no mystery here. When you're engrossed in the activity at hand, you're putting the piton in, attaching the carabiner to the piton, the rope to the carabiner, the rope to your harness, blah, 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 blah. All these little steps, one after the other, a series of successive successes, seriatim, one after the next. They all result in a feeling of, as I said, intense mastery over your subject. And the result, the reward, the psychological reward that climbers seek when they go on an expedition is to enter into a state of flow, because it induces a so-called generalized feeling of well-being. It's not like being shot with heroin or anything. It's a feeling of being on top of the world, a personal transcendence over your environment, and exaltation Let's put it that way. An elation, but a calm exaltation, not a frenetic one, not a drug high, but truly a Rocky Mountain high, if I may borrow a line from John Denver. It's a deadly calm that settles upon you. It's almost uncanny just how calm you are while you're in this exalted state of being. Mm-hmm. That's the goal of flow. And as I said, the prerequisites are that there must be a clear goal, there must be immediate feedback, and you must have this self-confidence where your capabilities are perceived to be roughly equivalent to your responsibility. In other words, you're up to the task. You feel, at least, that you're up to the task. And believe me, the mountain will remind you if you're not, immediately. So that leads on to the next subject. What is the purpose of all this flow? I maintain that it's to facilitate the creation of the existentialist concepts of creating something out of nothing. There's an old religious line, ex nihilo, out of nothing, nihil fit, nothing comes. Well, this doctrine that I'm talking about, flow, repudiates that. It says out of nothing, something can come by dint of your own will power. That existentialism is the doctrine that one is free through the exercise of free will to choose one's path in life and to define and shape one's destiny through the choices that you make as you go through life. In my addendum, the very last thing in the 5th edition with the addendum, I do point out that there are certain limits on this freedom, namely nature and nurture. Nature being your DNA, your physical inheritance, and nurture being the way you were reared, the values that were instilled in you when you were brought up. For instance, you're not going to find an Orthodox Jew or a Muslim, an observant Muslim, buying a pound of pork. He's free to do so, mind you, but he's culturally inhibited from doing so. That's an extreme example. But there are many things that we have inherent baggage, let's put it that way, that we've inherited from our parents' tutelage of us when we believed anything we were told as children. And very few people are free or are able to break free from the grip of what was instilled in them as a child. True, I know people who were born again Christians as youth, and in their adulthood, they repudiated all. I'm not a born-again Christian. Now I'm an atheist. And I also know people the other way around who were brought up as ethical culturalists or atheists, essentially, and then say, they found meaning in being born again Christian, whatever. Mm-hmm. These kinds of transformations do occur, but they're rare. Most people are inhibited by their cultural inheritance. And just like one's physical inheritance, the so-called 98-pound weakling, for instance, is not going to try out for the linebacker position in the Miami Dolphins. He's free to do so, but it just won't work. No, my cell phone is ringing. I'm going to close the door. Excuse me.
Sure.
Free moment. So with those qualifications of nature and nurture, I still maintain that there is room for free will to assert itself. After all, the Western penal system is predicated upon the existence of free will, that one can know the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. Determinism is the favorite defense of every defendant. My mother was an alcoholic. My father used to beat me. I was born, in this, sad circumstance. I was tricked by friends into robbing the bank. All these excuses are determinism at work, and I repudiate it. Of course, I am an attorney, so I have my own viewpoint about how things should operate in our system. But generally, deterministic answers impinge upon the scope of free will. More than nature and nurture, they are antithetical to the notion that there even is free will. Many defendants would want you to think that no, it doesn't exist, that they're creatures of their environment entirely shaped by others. But at what point does one require a person to account morally, or hold him responsible for his actions? You can't let everyone make an excuse for everything. So I do believe in free will, albeit being circumscribed by nature and nurture. That's all found in my poem, Constrained Freedom, a paradoxical analysis. That's in the addendum to the 5th edition, revised and expanded. I felt I ought to put that in order to qualify some of the more expansive claims of existentialism, that everything is free will and there's no limit on free will. That's not true either. Mm-hmm. There are limits on free will, as I pointed out. People's childhood rearing and their physical makeup. But the core values of free will persist. Mm-hmm. Now, moving beyond that, there is another entirely different category of desiderata, thing to be desired, a goal that climbers seek when they climb. It's generally called the freedom of the hills. And that's an old adage. It's still in common use. It's the subtitle of the standard textbook in the field called Mountaineering, the freedom of the hills. The first edition of which, published in 1960 by the Mountaineers in the Pacific Northwest, said this: the quest of the mountaineer, put in simplest terms, is for the freedom of the hills. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean? Well, I have a poem entitled The Freedom of the Hills, and in there I break down at least 3 meanings to it. There's a political freedom of the hills, the old expression, montani semper liberi. Mountain people are always free. Indeed, that's the motto of the state of West Virginia. In a political sense, the Romans would say, the Swiss and others, protected by their mountain fortresses, were free from centralized control. Indeed, the Swiss became free from the Holy Roman Empire in the Middle Ages because they controlled the mountain passes and so forth. Mm. But that's a very superficial aspect of the freedom of the hills. The generally accepted definition is the physical concept, that because of cultivating specialized skills, specialized equipment like crampons, ice axes, pitons, hollow ice screws, ascenders, and all the other ironmongery, we call it, we have technique, both from learned technique from experience and technique in the terms of equipment that enables us to traverse terrain that is otherwise denied to others.
Mm.
We enjoy the freedom of the hills to go where we will, to roam where we will. And spectators look upon us, in wonderment or in sarcastic, supercilious disparagement. They say, this is foolhardy, or I don't understand how he's up there. It looks very precarious. But it's because they have no clue as to specific mechanics that we employ in this sport of mountaineering to make it safe to go from point A to point B. We don't just rely upon luck to affix us to the mountain and to get from point A to point B. It's a complicated process. It takes years of apprenticeship. And the third meaning, I think, is the most important one, the psychological, beyond political and physical, the psychological aspect of the freedom of the hills, is that when one is in the hills, one is free from the judgment of others. The only people entitled to critique your choice of route, your technical expertise, the manner in which you put up protection, that's, what climbers call putting in pitons or other chalk stones as you go along to hold you in case of a fall. They and they alone, your peers and instructors, are entitled to critique you. That's what makes climbing an in-group, a subculture. Around the fireplace or in a bar, the members of this club talk to each other in their own argot, their own professional slang. And it's a closed world to people who are not initiated into its mysteries. That you don't have to listen to, and professional climbers don't care what the general spectator says about his performance or her performance, because he knows they're not qualified to judge him. So that's a freedom that every climber seeks, to rise above the common, let's not be too denigrating, but the common herd, and to enter into a specialized sport that confers upon you skills that surpass the understanding of the average observer.
This pertains to the pursuit of happiness as well?
The pursuit of happiness comes from the United States Declaration of Independence. It's a proclamation written by Jefferson in 1776, saying that governments are instituted among men, and he did say men, we would today say persons, for the purpose of guaranteeing the unalienable right to life, liberty, and what?
The pursuit of happiness.
Happiness. He didn't say property.
Yeah.
He could have said property, but he didn't. What does that mean? Well, looking at the Europe of his day, which was very class and caste rigid, with no upward mobility. If your father was a cobbler, you were going to be a cobbler. Well, here in America, one throws off those shackles and you are free. The government has a right to protect that freedom for you to rise to the level of your individual talent, whatever it may be, in whatever field you choose to pursue. That's the pursuit of happiness. It is the freedom of the hills is like a subset of the pursuit of happiness. It's one form of the pursuit of happiness. It's a type of endeavor that qualifies as a kind of pursuit of happiness. And with some people's lives, it becomes not their avid avocation, as it was mine, but their vocation. They are climbers, first, full-time. And I got a peek, a glimpse at those people. After all, I came from Central Park West, a nice Jewish boy. And when I was in Horace Mann, education, physical education was, mandatory. But I was not a jock. I did not enjoy organized sports like game sports, team sports, football, soccer, basketball, and so forth. I did join the wrestling team, but it's only a team in name. It's 1-on-1, and the victory or loss is attributed to the so-called team. That I did take up, but I felt no kinship with organized sports. I felt it submerged one's personality too much in the collective effort. Climbing isn't egotistical. That word today has negative connotations, but climbing is an assertion of the ego, the individual ego. And each climber believes himself to have some special gift that others don't have. That's a common belief system. It's probably not true, but that they believe it. And I devoted, to answer your original question, how did I come to do all this? Being a bookworm, or having been a bookworm. After my moment of clarity, I resolved I was not going to spend my life hunched over a desk. I had 4 weeks a year vacation, and I also took sabbaticals, which, affected my career, but it enabled me to look into this other world that Eastern seaboarders living at sea level and learning Keats, Shelley, Byron, Coleridge, Blake, and the rest of them, never have a clue about what mountaineers are doing. And the obverse is also true. Mountaineers tend to be laconic Westerners. That's a cliche almost, like Gary Cooper, right? But it's true in part, in great part. Actions is what they respect, not talking. They're not interested if you can talk the talk. They're interested if you can walk the walk.
Or climb the climb, if you will, right?
What's that again, please?
Or make the climb, if you will. Not only walk the walk, but talk the talk and make the climb. It is go ahead, I'm sorry.
To make the climb. They judge you by the quality of your effort, not necessarily by the objective success or failure, but by the energy and dedication that you applied to the effort. That's what defines you as a climber. Not every climb is successful. They don't say you're not a climber because you didn't succeed on some peak or other. You're a climber because you continue to try to succeed, to the exclusion of other distractions.
Well, we're glad that the lure of the mountains was able to drag you from the Central Park West area of Manhattan to the mountains, where you are not just a climber, you're also a philosopher, also an attorney, also a learned man. and you have reflected upon your life as a mountaineer in this wonderful collection of poetry and prose. It is called Reflections on Mountaineering, A Journey Through Life as Experienced in the Mountains by Alan V. Goldman. And Alan, before we leave you today, I just want to ask you one final question. Is there one climb that you made in all of your years of mountaineering that sticks with you till today? Perhaps it was one that was nearly cheating death. Perhaps it was one on a spectacular day that took your breath away. Tell us about your most memorable climb.
Well, I have a poem called Bailing Out. That's climber talk for quitting. Bailing out on Twining Peak. Twining Peak is not the most daunting peak in the world. It's right at the pass when you go from Denver into the high country. It's one of the mountains bordering the road that enters you into Aspen. You know, I began all of this by hiking with the Appalachian Mountain Club, with the usual areas, you know, the Appalachian Mountain Trail itself that cuts through northwest New Jersey, Sterling Forest, Harriman State Park, Anthony's Nose. All these places are only 1 hour north of Manhattan. Mm-hmm. From there, I went into skiing, and I skied at all the shishi places. Vail, Aspen, Breckenridge, Telluride, Jackson Hole, where the Grand Teton is, which is a very dramatic mountain. It leaps in an angry fashion right from the valley with no foothills. Indeed, they took Gorbachev there when Reagan negotiated nuclear limitations talks, because it is such an intimidating environment. But for me, Twining Peak, and I describe it in the poem, put the fear of God into me, because the angle of ascent became more than 45 degrees. 45 degrees feels like 90 degrees, okay, when you're up there. And it went to 57 degrees. And some mountains actually have overhangs, negative degrees. You're climbing upside down, up and around over the lip of a protruding promontory. Twining Peak had that, and it had other risks for avalanche that I didn't want to run the risk of. And the best climbing, let's put it this way, the best climbing that I did that day was in scurrying for the ridge, getting me out of the snow bowl of the, you know, the mountains are like diamonds. They have faces and ridges. And the easiest to climb are the ridges. The faces are where the avalanches occur. They are more exposed to rockfall, to hidden crevasses, and any number of what climbers call objective hazards, those outside your ability to control. Subjective hazards are those that you bring with you. Failure to tie your crampons on properly, not having gotten enough sleep the night before, all other kinds of subjective hazards that the climber has inside of himself. Objective hazards, though, are plentiful on faces of mountains. And Twining Peak had a huge snowball face, as did also Castle Peak, in the Elk Mountain Range due south of Aspen. And I have one poem called Wonder and Embrace. I believe it's on page 17 or something like that. And I said to myself, you know, is that what I'm expected to climb? Is that where my ambition draws me nigh? I was gobsmacked in wonder. That's the expression I use in the poem, colloquial though it is. I was stunned by my guide's expectation that I was going to climb this thing. I couldn't believe that he was expecting me to climb it. Fortunately, we didn't. We climbed the northwest ridge. Gaining onto the ridge was what climbers call the crux of the climb, the most difficult section of the climb, the most difficult pitch. A pitch is usually a rope length, 120 feet, depends upon what kind of rope you're using. We managed to gain the northwest ridge, and from there, it was pretty much of a walk-up with a few so-called gendarmes, which is French for policemen. It's a rock fire in your way on the route. Many terms in climbing are either German, Italian, or French, because the sport of mountaineering was born in the Alps when Edward Whymper climbed the Matterhorn with a Swiss guide in 1865. That's where what we think of as guided mountaineering trips by tyros, like I was, began. The whole notion of it. You know, Britishers going to the Alps and saying, I want to climb the Heron's Tooth, and hiring local guides to help him do it. This was a mid-Victorian, literally, exercise of England when it was in its greatest state of imperial expansion, when they felt they ruled the world and had the right to climb every summit. And they've tried Everest again and again and again. As famously, many know that, you know, Mallory and Irvine disappeared in 1982 on the ascent of Everest. Mallory's body was eventually found in 1997 by the Chinese with his camera. And there was hope that the Kodak film in it would show whether he had reached the summit and was on his way down, or whether he was still on his way up. Unfortunately, it didn't expose. Okay. It was too damaged by frostbite.
Alan, you're a fascinating man. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you've got tons of stories. I think you've got more books in you for sure. This book of poetry is wonderful. It's called Reflections on Mountaineering, A Journey Through Life as Experienced in the Mountains by Alan V. Goldman. It's a fascinating read that you will love whether you climb mountains or not, because it is a wonderful reflection on life. Alan.
Really intended to make accessible to the average educated reader this otherwise hidden world that they might just write off as inscrutable. It's not inscrutable if you learn some of literally the ropes and the terminology. And I tried to make it transparent, opaque, to non-climbers.
And I think you've succeeded, my friend. We are out of time. We've got to go. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Alan.
I appreciate the opportunity to express all these things. I think, as you can tell from the tenor of my voice, I'm animated by the subject.
You're wonderful. Let me just talk to the audience for just a second. To the folks at home, this is a great book. It is highly recommended. And I want to thank you for your time. Until next time, I'm Logan Crawford.